Welcome to the Roundhouse. I'm your host, Nick Ozorak. I've left the usual intro out because it didn't feel right to lead into this topic with something that didn't fit. The sooner we say it, the sooner we can solve it. There is sexism in rail preservation. It's not unique to rail preservation, it's not new, but we could start where we are. So why are we talking about this on the podcast today? Back in March of 2021, the Strasburg Railroad was getting a large amount of buzz for having a steam locomotive crewed by both a woman engineer and woman fireman. I saw on Facebook that while this led to plenty of praise, there were also a number of sexist jokes. Usually these were along the lines of, "That's hot. Oh, I was talking about the steam engine, tee-hee." There were plenty of jokes out there about how unreliable women drivers are as well. Now you could say, but Nick, those are just trolls. You can't take them seriously. Allowing these comments to go unchallenged makes our whole field look bad. It makes us appear permissive to such views, and thus I try to challenge them where I can. However, I will agree that it's not the worst manifestation of sexism. This experience on Facebook led me to create a survey called Women in Rail Preservation, which asked two straightforward questions and guaranteed anonymity to its respondents. I've posted all of the 29 responses to the survey in the show notes for this episode, or you could just search sexism on theroundhousepodcast.com. I want to share a few of those responses with you today. The first question asked, in your activities within rail preservation or rail fanning, have you had one or more experiences of encountering discrimination, sexual harassment, or rudeness/disrespect based on your gender? If yes, please describe briefly. Response number 1. Had teenage boys and old men try to grab me from the footplate or try and get me to give them my number. I had a boyfriend at the time and it was really off-putting. I've also had public members assume I can't do it just because I'm a girl and I'm young. Yes, it's physically demanding, but I wouldn't want to do anything else. Response number 2. Absolutely. I walked into a position with a supervisor who was former military, and he was fine with me until I dared to question a decision he made when he had no experience with the topic at hand. He was abrasive to not only myself, but other females that would ask for reasoning behind his decisions, and any female that tried to step outside her space, as he saw it. His attitudes towards women cost us a valuable volunteer and a crucial event because he wasn't going to be told how it was going to happen. Mind you, the volunteer had been handling this event for over 10 years. The supervisor was in the middle of year 1. When I decided to make an upward movement within the organization, this supervisor informed me that I should have requested his permission to make the change. Even my father will tell you that I don't ask permission. I've always been that way since I was little. I witnessed this supervisor make inappropriate comments to female staff, especially those that had weight issues. He must have felt that their weight made them an easy target, and the comments were not necessarily weight-related, but oftentimes would have qualified as sexual harassment. Yet he was the first one to go after one of the volunteers for such behavior, but never saw what he was doing as equally inappropriate behavior. Response number 3. Yes, I was sexually harassed and often felt like I was treated very differently. I would rather not go into detail as I am still involved in preservation, but my experiences have deeply affected me. Response number 4. Yes, I started working at a new railroad as an engineer and fireman. I was hired on because I previously had 8 years' experience. My gender was a constant comment by crews. I've had engineers tell me how great it is to see a woman in the cab, but it always feels so backhanded. I've had guys I'm teaching ignore me because I'm a woman teaching them how to fire, and clearly women can't fire than someone who is just learning. Both of these things clear up pretty quickly once they realize I'm one of the best firemen on the roster, or so I've been told by my friends at work. I had one engineer try to run me out of steam because I was new and a woman to test how good I am. Spoiler alert, I caught up. I had a Division of Labor Standards Enforcement person tell me, quote, not to make it a bullshit sex thing, in reference to me wearing my hair up in a bandana, a la Rosie the Riveter, instead of a hat, when I said the uniform policy does not take into account what women wore when they worked for the railroad, and only men. He wanted to take me out of service or get me fired for this. I've been told I'm not allowed to use the communal changing area after I get done because it makes people uncomfortable, and instead I have to change in the bathroom or use a coach. I could go on, but you said brief. Response number 5. Yes, being told that I can't do a man's job on the footplate and it's only for men. I've been firing steam locomotives for 22 years now. End quote. I should make it clear that 4 women did say that they had not experienced sexual discrimination, but there are far more who have. I encourage you to read all of these responses on your own. Regarding the last response, her experience with judgment aligns perfectly with something else I saw. When I shared this survey to a railroad preservation forum, a man who is well respected within our industry wrote this, quote, "With the upfront admission that I'm old-fashioned and in today's world undoubtedly out of date, to me, steam railroading is a male domain suited best for men. We have a number of female members in our organization who make a great contribution overall, but not in engine service. In today's all-diesel or electric world, females are fine, and I'm sure make as many good runners as men. I certainly agree that watching our language and deportment when women and children are present is just good manners." End quote. I could name this person here, but I won't. Not because his views aren't terribly condescending, which they are, implying that women can only run diesels because they're easier, but because I don't want to make this a witch hunt against him. All too often, when things go wrong in rail preservation, we blame specific people or organizations rather than examining the underlying systemic issues and attitudes that allow for these problems to manifest. The question this raises is, when many of our nonprofits and other organizations are struggling to find volunteers, why would we want to rule out half the population? Here's a piece of advice that came from another woman from the survey. Quote, "They need to realize that women are just as capable of knowing the history as a man. There are plenty of women out there that can turn wrenches as well as the men, and they can do the maintenance and repairs just like the guys do. It's time that we realize that yes, men and women are different, but that doesn't mean they can't do the same jobs. Men are just as capable of raising the kids and cooking the meals as the women are, and the women can paint, weld, and drive just like the guys can." End quote. This form of sexism prevents women from achieving their goals in rail preservation. To be leaders at tourist railroads and museums, to be engineers or firemen. It's easy to fight sexist comments like the jokes on Facebook or the man who believes steam locomotives are a male domain. It's harder to address where the volunteer supervisor is discouraging women from helping, where a man is promoted to executive director over a woman just because of his masculinity, where a steam locomotive contractor's history of sexual harassment is overlooked because of his expertise. On top of that, though, sexism is simply bad business for rail preservation. It holds all of us back. We owe it our best efforts to eradicate sexism, not just because it's the right thing to do and it helps our efforts and organizations. We owe it to the railroad workers, both men and women, whose stories we share. We owe it to our collective dedication to preserve historic equipment. And we owe it to building that brighter future. We must have these conversations to find solutions. And I will always be willing to have them here. I'm not afraid of the folks who have accused me of, quote, lazy and unprofessional journalism. Yes, those are real things that have happened simply by me releasing the survey. I'm also mindful that I don't want to make anyone feel that they have to speak on behalf of all women when addressing what it means to be a woman in rail preservation. If you have some ideas as to how we should continue this conversation, feel free to contact me at Nick Ozorak at theroundhousepodcast.com. We also have a contact us page on the website. However, this conversation should not start and end with this podcast. It cannot. If you are part of the railroad press, I challenge you to continue this conversation. It may not be the most fun thing to talk about, but we must demonstrate that we are serious about combating this systemic issue. Having articles, episodes, and videos dedicated to discussing this demonstrates that our industry is prepared to have these tough conversations and to find solutions. If you're involved in a tourist railroad, museum, or any rail preservation organization, make sure you have a policy somewhere in writing regarding how to deal with sexual harassment or discrimination. If you have people who are known perpetrators, don't give them a pass just because of their expertise. If you have opportunities, make sure you extend them to women as well as men. If you're a woman in rail preservation or rail fanning, keep at it and continue to grow. You deserve every opportunity you've earned to get to where you are, and your stories prove that this passion, hobby, and even career opportunities should be available to any woman who wants it. You are building that brighter future simply by being visible, doing what you enjoy. Lastly, I ask everyone listening to this episode of the podcast to share it. Please share it on social media or discuss this with your organization. We must keep the conversation moving forward if we are to bring an end to sexism. Thank you for listening to this all the way through. As you know, I end every episode of our show by saying, the roundhouse is our house. And I truly mean it. Everyone who wants to be involved in rail fanning or rail preservation deserves that opportunity. In this house, you are always welcome.